Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. I'm sorry we're starting a little late. We had some technical problems, as you could probably tell from these sort of agitated faces up here at the front. We are very fortunate today to have a very old friend of the Society's back with us, Christoph Baumer, who will be known personally to many of you, even in my relatively short time with the Society. This is the third time he's spoken to us, and we had the honor of launching one of his books not so very long ago, 2019. One of the last things we did before the COVID pandemic struck. So I'm not going to spend any further time on introducing Christoph, but I will hand over to him, and we can come back to questions, obviously, once the talk is over. There is an online audience as well. Welcome to everybody who's joining us by Zoom, and we will get started. Christoph, welcome.
Dear colleagues, dear people interested in the history of the Caucasus, it's a great pleasure to be again able to address you with a small lecture. I just remembered before the last time I was able to do so, that was more than 4 years ago. Then we had the interruption of COVID, and unfortunately also some dear faces I was used to see, unfortunately aren't here anymore. Caucasus before and during world wars. As you see on the, I adapted a bit the title, and I put the undertitle, A Tormented History. It is indeed a very complex history, and I am afraid I will going to torment you also a bit with many maps and many figures. What is the Caucasus today? We have 3 independent states, Azerbaijan, Armenia, and Georgia in the south. Then we have 2 pseudo-states, Abkhazia and South Ossetia. Till about 2 months ago, we had a 3rd pseudo-state, Nagorno-Karabakh. And in the northern Caucasus, we have 8 Russian autonomous republics. To understand the situation around the 1900s, and that's where we're going to start to talk, we need to take a few steps backwards to see what tremendous development the Caucasus region in political terms took. All you see here, this is one empire. It's the Georgian Empire around the year 1200. What you notice, there is no Armenia. The last state of Armenia within the Caucasus was gone by 1055, and then later there was an Armenian state in exile, which was in Cilicia, but we don't touch that one. There was no Azerbaijan anymore. Azerbaijan as an independent country was gone in the 7th, 8th century, and its name at those times was Albania, not to be confused with the Balkan Albania. And as I show, Georgia was a big empire going from the Caspian Sea to the Black Sea and almost to Lake Van. However, things changed. Following the Mongol attacks and the terrible devastations by Tamerlan, Georgia was then partitioned into 3 kingdoms and 6 principalities. So the unity of Georgia was gone. The 3 kingdoms were Kakheti, Kartli, and Imereti. These were the 3 kingdoms. Very soon they fragmented even more, and there were then 6 independent principalities in the west. And of course, this fragmentation of states has a lot to do also with the geography of the countries, because it's so mountainous. You have narrow valleys which have their own ethnicities and then their own cultures. The South Caucasus was then in the 16th and 17th century the battleground for 8, not less than 8, Ottoman, Safavid, Persian wars. In 1639, the Caucasus was partitioned. On one hand, the lion's share took Persia. The western side, close to the Black Sea, was taken by the Turkish Ottomans. So by this time, there was no more independent state or country within the Caucasus. They were vassals either of Persia or the Ottomans. We come to this gentleman, that's King Erekle II, who managed to briefly unite Georgia again in the year 1768. He was under terrific pressure from Persia, who wanted to negate his independence. And in 1783, King Erekle underwent the fateful Treaty of Georgiesk in 1783 with Russia and put Georgia under Russian protection. So Georgia became a Russian protectorate, and according to contracts, all foreign policy was to be taken by Russia. There were many conditions, and also Russia was bound to defend the country. But in 1795, when Persia attacked again under Aga Muhammad, Russia simply ignored the defense obligations and let the Persians invade Georgia, Tbilisi, and put it to fire. Tsarina Catherine, so-called the Great, only sent troops after the Persians had left. And this reminds me very, very much of the strategy Stalin was doing in 1944. The Red Army was approaching Warsaw, then the guerrilla of Warsaw, which was rather pro-West, pro-American, than pro-Russian. They made the revolt of Warsaw, and Stalin, what did he do? For several weeks, he halted the army. He waited till the Nazi had crushed the revolt and killed the people, and then he entered to the city. A few years later, in 1800, Tsar Paul signed the decree which annexed Georgia. So now Georgia is just what Georgia and the surrounding provinces were just divided into gubernorates, so provinces of the Russian Empire. Russia had, after 1806, sorry, I think I should go back, yeah, a second. We see here the map of the situation of the Russian borders. I put it in plural in the south. There is one border here, because this part, the northern side of the Caucasus, Russia hardly controlled. There were some Cossack stanitsas, especially with the Caucasian, and then with the Chechens and the Dagestani people, the Kumuk. They were fully independent tribal organizations, either organized in a hierarchical way with princes, or on a more, one can say, military democratic way, where there were councils of elders who would decide what kind of course the state would take. Then, here Russia came down, took what is today a major part of today's Azerbaijan, which were at those times semi-autonomous regions which belonged to Iran. Nakhchivan and Yerevan were not yet part of Russia. And then interesting, Russia had one very narrow corridor, the so-called Georgian military highway. So I said before, one southern border of Russian Empire, and then the second one running here. For any empire, of course, this was an impossible situation to have such a big territory not under its control, and it would guide the policy of Russia over the next centuries. Persia, of course, tried to reconquer the lost provinces which Russia had taken in today's Azerbaijan, and also wanted to negate the previous independence of Georgia. In those days, that was the time of the third anti-Napoleonic coalition, where the UK and Russia were allied. France was the enemy. So Persia turned to Napoleon to see if they could obtain a military protection and also help to reconquer their lost provinces. I may add that Persia was quite already diplomatic contacts with the French Directory as of 1797, 1798. So there was the famous treaty. Unfortunately, it's a bit hidden under all these labels. The famous Treaty of Finkenstein in April 1807, where Persia and France signed a treaty of mutual defense. France was committed to help Persia to reconquer its lost provinces. On the other hand, Persia was committed to resist any encroachment by the Brits. However, after the defeat of the Russian army and the Peace of Tilsit, which occurred only 2-3 months later, on the 7th July 1807, Russia joined the French camp, and from that moment, of course, Napoleon didn't feel bound to do anything about the former provinces of Iran, of Persia. Sorry. Yeah, that is right. So that was the situation at the beginning of the 19th century. In between, Russia had attacked Yerevan and Nakhchivan, and in the Treaty of Turkmenchai in 1828, Persia had first to recognize that it lost all these territories and to hand over furthermore Yerevan and Nakhchivan. However, the situation was the same. Here we have now the Russian southern border. All this belongs to Russia, and all this big chunk in brown, yellow was not controlled by Russia. So what, and here you see, I talk a lot about Russia, I talk about Napoleon, I talk about England, I talk very little about over the Caucasus countries. Why? Because they didn't have the room and the flexibility and the power to control their own fate. They were like a ball of big powers. The first thing Russia would do is to strengthen its position of the Georgian military highway by occupying here Kabardia and trying to get a foothold into Ingushetia and Chechnya. And the goal behind was not to get a direct access into Georgia from the north, from Vladikavkaz, but to ensure that the two tribal confederations that resisted most Russian rule, the Chechens and the Circassians, wouldn't be able to join. The next move of Russia was going into, as I said, northern Caucasus to broaden the Georgian military highway and to separate the Circassian from the Chechens. That these are typical defense towers you still find today in the Caucasus, both in the south and in the north. And it shows also how belligerent in those days society were, because these towers were not only there to defend against an attacking enemy from abroad, from foreign, but also to protect the people who stood under the threat of blood feud. So there were people sometimes during decades they wouldn't be able to leave such a tower. The northern Caucasus is extremely mountainous. At those times, it was also very forest. There are deep valleys, high mountains to climb, and the people lived in either wood or in mud villages. This means, and the Russian army first they had to advance, and one sees a painting with some mountain artillery. That was they had a cumbersome army, problems to maneuver, poorly trained and poorly educated, motivated recruits, and often in the Caucasus it were the second-rate commanders who were in charge. This means that there was a type of warfare from the Napoleonic times, which was adequate in the plains of Western Europe, of course, didn't work at all in the Caucasus, and the Russians accumulated defeat after defeat. I may add already beginning of the 19th century, the life of a Russian soldier was not more worth than a dog. Then an officer called Velyaminov, he was a military genius and he devised a totally different strategy. The strategy was, and you see, these were these kind of fortresses and strongholds the Chechens and Dagestani would hold, very difficult to access. And they were protected by deep forests. So he devised the strategy that one had first to clear the forests and build broad roads, and to establish then a ring of fortress around the strongholds in order to establish an economic blockade. So this was the strategy. To say it shortly, the axe must precede the bayonet. Furthermore, people who defected to the Russian side were offered very favorable conditions. And so it came that the three imamats that we had in Chechnya and in Dagestan in the middle of the 19th century, in 1859, the Russian force Imam Shamil, whom we see here, to surrender. And in the eastern part of the Caucasus, then the resistance to the Russian stopped. You can also imagine how tough it is to conquer such a place. You can't use a horse, you can't bring artillery, anything. It's a hand-to-hand fighting. What about the West, the Caucasian? The Russians gave the Caucasian an ultimatum. Either they leave their mountain villages or they have to leave the country. About 90% of them, about 1.5 million, 1.7 million, decided then to go into the Ottoman Empire. They were also how shall I say, allured by the Ottoman Empire that they were welcome. But of course, when they arrived, with the exception of young men who could be used in the cavalry, nothing was prepared for these people, and they ended in a very miserable life. Sorry. But the Circassians were no match for the Russian, and in spite of quite heavy, although undercover involvement of the Brits, especially in providing arms and some guidance how to handle artillery. Just one word, the so-called Urquhart scandal, when a ship was seized, but I won't go into details right now. The Caucasus became a secondary theater of war in the Russian Ottoman War of 1877-78, which played mainly in today's Bulgaria. Of course, Russia wasn't really interested neither in some countries in the Caucasus, which were poor and costed a lot, nor so much in the Christian of Bulgaria, which had revolted against the Ottoman. The prime and the only main goal was Constantinople. And that was a policy that already Tsarina Catherine II had formulated in the, in the later 70s. That was the goal, Constantinople. And then from Constantinople, of course, they would be able to play a big role in the Mediterranean Sea. And now comes the United Kingdom, Great Britain. At all costs, Great Britain wanted to avoid that Constantinople would fall into the hand of Russia. In the Caucasus, there was one region that had a terrific economic boom. That is today's region of Baku in Azerbaijan, where the Noble brothers was pioneered in oil drilling. And it's a nice small story. Originally, the Nobles, they had a factory doing dynamite and also manufacturing rifles. And one of the nobles, the Robert Noble, had been sent by his elder brother in the late 1870s to buy in Azerbaijan walnut wood for rifle stocks. Robert was quite an awake guy, and he saw immediately the huge potential of the oil drilling, because the Russian had decided not to keep anymore a monopoly about oil drilling, but to sell it per auction. And instead of buying wood for the rifles, he spent all the money to get oil drilling licenses and bought a small refinery. What came out of it? In 1897, less than 20 years after the Nobles entered the market, Baku oil fields controlled 45% of world output. Absolutely enormous, number 2 behind the US, of which the family Noble controlled 20%. That means 9% of world output came from the Noble refineries. Other big ones were the Rothschilds and then some Russian investors. I will come back in a second to Baku. So then we have an unbalanced Georgia. Today's Georgia, the majority of the people around Tbilisi, these were Armenians. They were not living in Armenia. Armenia was very poor. The well-educated Armenians lived either in Tbilisi, which was the capital of the governorate and was a trading center, and the second place they lived in Baku, and they were the white-collar workers, the managers in the oil industry. Now, even if Russia controlled the South Caucasus on a military point of view, things were not so smooth. And it's an interesting fact. I mentioned before the Armenians lost their last state in 1055. 1055, more than 800 years than the date we see here. And they were by far the most fierce nationalists of, let's say, the 3 great nations we have, Georgian, Armenians, and Azerbaijans. There were 2 Armenian nationalist movements. One was the Social Democrat Hunchak. They were more socialist orientated. They wanted the socialist South Caucasus, not very clear within Russia or outside Russia, and their tools were mass demonstrations and strikes. The leading movement, however, was the Armenian Revolutionary Federation, called Dashnak. The party exists still today. They had 2 goals: an independent socialist Armenia of East Anatolia, because I have to say, of the about 4 million Armenians that existed at those times, half lived in today's South Caucasus in Russia, and the other half lived in Turkey, mainly in Constantinople, and then also in Eastern Anatolia. So there were 2 wings of the Armenians. So the first priority was independence in East Anatolia, and second priority, socialism in South Caucasus. In 1907, the Russian viceroy managed to crush and also to buy some leading Dashnak members and then to crush them, and they changed their priority. Their priority was an independent national Armenia of East Anatolia and Caucasus. What were the strategy? And here comes a big paradox. Turkey. Cooperation with the Young Turks. So they would quote the Armenian, although there had been pogroms against the Armenian already in the late 1890s, they choose to support the Young Turks. And within the Caucasus region, they kept a low profile. We come to the Georgian side. Among the Russian Social Democratic Workers' Party, there had been a split in 1903 between the, let's say, relatively more moderate Mensheviks and the Bolsheviks of Lenin. The Mensheviks, just a sec, sorry. Yeah, the Mensheviks partly wanted to go through the system, through the state parliamentarism, while the Bolsheviks, their strategy were violent mass demonstration to provoke bloody reprisals by police and military forces, and this again to turn up that the people revolt against the regime. And how did it bring to Baku? In February 1905, there were the Bloody Sunday in St. Petersburg with hundreds of people killed. It spilled immediately into the Baku region, and Stalin, whom we see here, famously said the hour, and he spoke, of course, to the workers, and I come in a second who the workers were. He said to the workers, the moment of the revenge has come. And the dangerous issue, and this is one of the fundamental issues that still today, Azerbaijani and Armenian don't like each other, if I may say it in an euphemism. The class struggle was also a struggle and a clash of ethnicities, because in Baku, the manager, the clerical people, the white collars were either Russian or Armenians. The oil drillers who did the dirty work were so-called Tatars, how they were called, so local Muslim Azerbaijanis. And of course, there were the social class between the workers and the white collars, the owners of the refineries and of the oil fields, was therefore also an ethnic clash, and to a lesser degree also a religious clash. But primarily it was economic, and the bad luck, as history would show, that economic dividing lines were the same as the ethnic dividing lines. World War I. The Armenians were originally divided. I said the Dashnak chose after 1908 the strategy to support the Young Turks. So by 10,000 young Armenians living in Anatolia volunteered to serve in the Ottoman army. At the same time, 10,000 of young Armenians volunteered to serve in the Russian army. But it never came to a real clash between Armenians. Why? Because already in January, February 1915, those Armenians who had joined the Turkish army got demobilized, and the thought behind was very clear: no Armenian should be armed. So no Armenian should be able to defend himself. Turkey or Ottomans were ruled by a triumvirate. Interior Minister Talat Pasha, he would be the main responsible for the genocide. Navy Minister Jafar Pasha, less important, and the War Minister Enver Pasha, who was also enthusiastic proprietor of pan-Turkism, so that all Turkish people should join in an effort. Although he was not a military man, Enver Pasha in December 1914 took personal command of a campaign against the strong Russian fortress of Sarikamish, which is to the west of Kars in today's eastern Anatolia, and met a terrible defeat of an army of 95,000 Turkish troops. 70,000 never returned. They either were killed or frozen. And here we see a historic reenactment of that battle. However, Enver Pasha, he needed now a scapegoat. He was not the culprit. These were the treacherous Armenians who had helped the Russians to advance. So he needed first a scapegoat. And secondly, Ottoman Turkey was burdened by about 2 million Muslim Turkic refugees coming from the Balkans, where the Ottoman Empire had lost peace after peace after peace after peace. So there were about 2 million refugees. These needed homes, these needed land. The best solution was kill the Armenians, drive them away, and then we have land for these refugees. That's what happened. It started in March 1915, first with the leaders who were arrested in Constantinople, so to behead the organization of the Armenians. And then in the countryside, there would be either regular troops or irregulars. They would collect or gather the young men. The young men would be killed immediately. And as I said before, they were disarmed. And then the women, the elder people, children were forced to march toward the desert in Syria. About the numbers, about 2 million got deported, between 650 and 1 million got killed, and more than 200,000 were forced conversions. There are so many witnesses, be it American businessmen, American people from the embassy, also many German officers who were allied with the Ottomans, who were present in the whole of Turkey. There are so many documents, so many photographs that this massacre can't be questioned. And here we see the memorial, which is today in Yerevan, of the genocide. In between, in the east, like in the west, there was a military draw between Russia and the Ottomans. When the revolution in 1917, the February Revolution started, the Russian army disintegrated very fast, and the Turkish army could advance without really resistance. Now comes again an interesting point. In those days, South Caucasus was still a Russian government, so it was a province. But Turkey wanted, of course, to weaken the Russian as much as possible. And when the government of the South Caucasus, which spoke for the Georgian, less for the Armenian, but still, and for the Azerbaijan, asked the Turks for a ceasefire to stop the troops advancing, it was the precondition set by Turkey that these South Caucasus governments or provinces should declare themselves independent from Russia. So basically, the independence of the future three South Caucasian states in 1918 was ordered by the enemy Turkey about these republics. Initially, they didn't want. Anyway, they formed then, they formed the so-called Transcaucasian Democratic Republic. Some of the text is unfortunately missing, created under Ottoman ultimatum. Of course, there were huge contradictions within these confederations. The Azeri, the Azerbaijani, they welcomed the Turks. These were their brothers. The Georgians feared Turkish territorial demands, namely all the coast on the Black Sea. And the Armenians feared a second genocide. What happened? Georgia moved first and put itself after 5 weeks under German protection and became a German protectorate, and some few troops of the German army under General Kress von Kressenstein moved in. The Armenians were able in one battle of Sardarapat to stop the Turkish advance, but they had to agree to a very unfavorable peace of Batumi. So basically the road for the Turks was open. Georgia was protected by the German, which was an ally of Turkey, although in those days there were already very big tensions between the two former allies. Nevertheless, in this very tense, difficult situation, Armenia didn't hesitate in fall 1918, before the armistice of Mudros, where Turkey capitulated, to attack Georgia and advanced towards Tbilisi. It ended in a draw, but of course it had left a terrible impression of the allies, who would later decide what to do with the South Caucasus. One of the aspects which happened in the South Caucasus was also the race for Baku between the Ottomans, the Germans, the Russians, and Great Britain. So one sees now the two premium war allies, Turkey and Germany, have contradictory interests. And the Germans in between have secret agreement with Lenin's Russia. On the other hand, the former allies Germany and Britain fell fully apart. And anyway, it ended that Dunstowil was chased away from Baku in September. He had to leave, attacked by the army of Islam, directed indirectly by Enver Pasha. Kress von Kressenstein, the German, had to agree and let the Turkey advance. And Stepan Shahumian, he was one of the famous 28 Soviet or Bolshevik commissars who got later shot. Basically, Turkey won the battle for Baku, but of course they lost the war. And with the armistice of Mudros, Britain was again able, with General Thompson, to occupy Baku. Yeah. The Caucasus, especially the north, was also touched by one of the several civil wars which were raging in Russia. And it was the armed forces of South Russia, led by Denikin, again with heavy British support in terms of officers, tanks, and aeroplanes. There was here the so-called Ice March, when the almost defeated White Army retreated into the East Caucasus, and that is the maximum territory the Whites under Denikin occupied. They took Stalingrad, in those days called Staritsin, and advanced 400 kilometers south of Moscow. In those days, the war was fought, of course, with infantry, but mainly armed train, which we see here, and cavalry. Contrary to the Western Front and the Western War, these wars in the East were extremely mobile. And that's what brought Trotsky, who understood the importance of cavalry still in the 19th century, who could ideally work together with an armored train. Under the slogan, proletarians to horse, he built the cavalry under a famous later field marshal in World War II, Budyonny. And they managed, if I may go back, to drive here a wedge between the two main wings of the White Army, driving straight into the northern Caucasus, Novorossiysk, and this was the end of the White Army and the southern Russian forces. They got then evacuated. Sorry, I'm one too fast. They got then evacuated from Novorossiysk. Where is it? Here, Novorossiysk, in the Caucasus by British and French warships. I said before, Georgia and Armenia left a very negative impression on the allies, who met at the peace conference in Paris, 1990, the question was, what shall we do with the Russian provinces or gouvernorates which declared their independence? Should we allow the Russians, whoever it be, the Denikin, the Whites, or the Soviets, or the future Soviets, or the Lenin Stoops, the Red, to reoccupy it? Or should one guarantee them the independence? But one was never ready to put also troops behind it. I show the demands of the three provisional governments that existed in that. The demand of Georgia is the green line, relatively modest, not much bigger than today's Republic of Georgia. The Azerbaijani wanted much more, today's Azerbaijan, but they wanted to extend till to the Black Sea, and that to leave only very, very tiny Armenia around the today's province of Yerevan. The Armenians, for their part, I'm sorry to say they were megalomaniac. That is today's Armenia, this place. And that's what they demanded. They demanded all the places which 2000 years before, namely their king Tigranes II in the 2nd century BC, had very briefly for a period of maybe 20 years conquered. You see one of the quotes, the Armenians are in genuine danger of grasping too much and losing it all. It was, of course, totally impossible that so few people should be able to control so many people. And even already within the Armenia, they had the administration was very problematic. Furthermore, of course, the nationalists in Turkey, led by Kemal Pasha, the later Atatürk, were vehemently opposed to such plan, and also the French were opposed, because what the Armenian demanded was in contradiction to the Sykes-Picot agreement. I mark in yellow, but that's just for history. That would be then the rule of the President of the United States, Woodrow Wilson, what he thought Armenia should encompass. The key in today's in Anatolia, East Turkey, was the fortress of Kars we see here, which the Armenians, of course, had again be able to occupy because Turkey had capitulated. In the Treaty of Sèvres in August 1920, the Allies recognized and imposed that the future Wilson arbitration would be valid. A few weeks later, the Turkish General Karabekir attacked. Then I said, on 22 December, President Wilson assigned 160,000 square kilometers, 160,000 square meters to Armenians, who counted in those days less than 12 million people. And 8 days later, came the Turkish ultimatum to Armenia, that they should capitulate and basically become a protectorate of Turkey. This left Armenia between the choice either to become a protectorate of Turkey or to join the future Soviet Union, what they did. You see the same time between 1920 and 1921, Bolshevik Russia managed to reconquer the South Caucasus. The only one who really resisted was General Stay. In today, Zangetsuo, Siunik, we come again to them. I have to make some time management. Germany had evacuated the leading Turkish leader to Berlin. Yeah. Come back. And Berlin, Germany, refused to hand out these people who got convicted in Constantinople, many of them to death. I highlight in red the three leaders of the Triumvirat in Turkey and some other Azerbaijanis, and then some Armenian organization managed to execute in the Operation Nemesis and had these people killed or assassinated, most of them in Germany. One, the last one, Enver Pasha, then met his death in the battle in today's Tajikistan. I have to come back here. Nagorno-Karabakh, the question, Nagorno-Karabakh, Zangezur, and Nakhchivan. To whom do we attribute it? Stalin took the decision on economic and political reasons to give Karabakh, which had a majority of Armenian population, to Azerbaijan. Why? First, Kemal Atatürk was adamant that it should go to the Azerbaijani. Second, Azerbaijan had oil, it was more important. And third, Karabakh was economically fully dependent on Azerbaijan. Nakhchivan had already, in the antiquity, it was mainly Armenian, but Nakhchivan had already in 1919, 1920, a slight Muslim Tatar majority, and Nakhchivan went to Azerbaijan. Now, so here we have Azerbaijan, also this part, and here's Nakhchivan. And one thing Stalin didn't want. He didn't want that Turkey we see here would have a land contact to Azerbaijan and thus be able to fulfill the dream of pan-Turkism. And that's the reason that Stalin gave Syunik, this also called Zangezur, to the Armenians, to drive a wedge between the two parts of Azerbaijan. This we had. Okay, now we are in the Soviet period. So, of course, the South Caucasus and any other place suffered the collectivization. The North was very strongly hit in the early 30s by famine, a famine which had been internally made because Stalin wanted to modernize the heavy industry of Soviet Union. For this, he needed cash, and the only thing he could sell for cash was grain. So the army would come and confiscate all the grain silos and reserves the people in the Ukraine. The Ukrainians call it Holodomor, created hunger. And in North Caucasus, where about 1 million people got killed. As you see, that is a picture I took in 2018. Stalin is still today admired under some strata of the Georgian society. Then came the Stalin's purge. Also, the Caucasus was, of course, not at all spared. One believes that about 700,000 people were shot, killed, and the people in the communities, they would get simply a quota. And one of the masters who organized the purchase, by the way, was the Georgian Beria, Lavrenti Beria. We meet him again. And there would be an order to the community. I say something, a number, 5%, 10% have to be shot, full stop. That was, of course, a wonderful opportunity for clans who were hostile to each other, that they could eliminate the one they didn't want to have around anymore. We come to another interesting Azerbaijani of German stock. This is now our friend Richard Sorge. That's the monument in his honor, which is today in Baku. He was the top Soviet spy, and he was probably the only person who was an active member of the NSDAP, so the Nazi party, and the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. He was camouflaged as German journalist, and in Tokyo, he became friend with the German ambassador in Tokyo, and he became also the lover of the wife of the ambassador. Interestingly, on the 1st and the 20th of June, he predicted and warned Stalin that the German attack was imminent within a couple of days or hours, and that Germany would attack with 175 divisions. on the 22nd of June, Stalin ignored it, didn't want to do anything with that. Operation Barbarossa started. More important, between July and September 1941, Soroke informed Stalin several times that Japan would not attack Russia. And that was, of course, absolutely key. In those days, the Nazis were standing before Moscow and Leningrad, and Stalin had to decide if he could allow, troops to move from the east, move to the west to fight the Germans. This time he believed what Soroke said, his spy, and indeed, the Japanese never attacked Eastern Russia. He also already in 1941 foresaw and told Stalin that the next attack of the Germans after winter would be the Caucasus, which brings us to the next slide. No? Okay, it's a bit complicated. To make it short, in the first Wardery directive of Adolf Hitler from April 42, it was said Moscow should be, the pressure on Moscow should be held, Leningrad should be kept, and all, I quote, unite all forces for the main operation in the southern sector, which is the Caucasus, with the ultimate aim to take the oil wells of Baku and of Grozny. But I was too fast. What happened in July? The southern forces got divided. In Group B, we should attack Stalingrad, take the city, and Group A, which should attack the Black Sea coast, the Caucasus passes, and capture the oil fields. So the whole force that was first thought to attack the Caucasus got cut into two, halved, with the impact we are all aware of. Of course, it made sense. If the bulk of the Germans, of the Nazi, where is it here, would have entered like that and go till Baku, they would have opened their left flank to Russian counterattack. At first, the OKW, the Oberkommando, thought to just have a barrier here under to prevent this attack, but later, as we saw, Hitler ordered that Stalingrad should be taken. The majority of the troops, although not the best in quality, were sent to the north, the other ones into the south. Now, how far did the Nazis come into the Caucasus? They were never able to cross the main ridge, although they had mountain troops. So you see, even in 1942, mountains was a difficult obstacle. They came till Moscow, they failed to reach Grozny, and they failed, of course, to reach Baku. And on the western side, they also never managed to occupy the coast of the Black Sea. Some images from the campaign. As I said, they managed to cross 42 the River Don, but failed to take Astrakhan, a mountain feat to climb the Mount Elbrus. But again, they crossed the Caucasus passes, but couldn't come down to the coast, and the attack on Vladikavkaz and Grozny failed. Why? The famous historian, Liddell Hart was able to interview the German commanding officers in 1994, 96, and von Kleist is the one who took up the command as of late October in the Caucasus. He said, the primary cause of our failure was shortage of petrol. Then he had to give all his motorized troops, Flak and Luftwaffe. Then there had been, among else, they had very outdated maps, the Germans. Just imagine, at the oil fields at Maikop. Maikop is a city, but the oil fields are spread over a territory of about 400 square kilometers. the Germans didn't know where they were. They had no clue. And this gave, of course, the Russians the time to sabotage the oil wells. Then, obviously, bad treatment of the local POV didn't motivate traitors. A stubborn Soviet defense, and, as we know, an impending Soviet victory at Stalingrad, where the Sixth Army under Paulus was already encircled, freed a lot of Soviet troops, which were now able to rush to the south. And there was a moment where the Soviets were 70 kilometers from Rostov, that's the bottleneck, where one can move out of the Caucasus, and Kleist was 650 kilometers away. It's the only time when that Hitler gave a general the promotion to field marshal because he handled well a defeat, because von Kleist managed to keep his army. The question one often comes when one talks the Nazi in the Caucasus is, what about the collaborators? What did the people do? For whom did they fight? From many sources, I can do these numbers of Caucasian people who fought on the side of the Soviet Union. 1.5 million Azerbaijani, Georgian, Armenians, of whom an enormous toll of more than a third, 550,000 died. Collaborators, one knows, about 24 Azerbaijan, 25,000 Georgian, 18,000 Armenians, and some small Sonderkommando. This means only 5% they were collaborators with the Nazi compared to those who fought on the Soviet side. Nevertheless, when the Soviets had managed to push the Germans out of the Caucasus, came the famous deportations of local people from the northern Caucasus. I give here all the numbers. Although the majority of those people who fought from these ethnicities, the vast majority, we saw more than 90%, 95%, fought loyally on the Soviet side, these people got deported. Although even some people like the Kalmyks on top, they had some decorated generals in the Soviet army, they all got deported. In total, 800,000 people from the North Caucasus. Excuse me. After the famous secret speech of Khrushchev in 1956, the people were gradually allowed to return. But of course, this brought renewed problems because the places, the cities where the people had been displaced were not empty. Other peoples had been settled, and now the returnees after 10 years came. I don't want to go into detail, but especially in Chechnya, in Ingushetia, this brought a huge problem and tensions. And some of these problems, excuse me, we had in the 1990s a couple of short wars between Chechnya and Ingushetia, goes back to this story. Give me 5 more minutes. Let's go to the 21st century, the north. The city with a large Russian populations, relatively little ethnic specialities, are today relatively prosperous. So, for example, Rostov, Krasnodar, Armavir, and so on. The troublemaker, if I may so say, of the Chechens have been pacified, again in brackets, by making Chechnya a kind of state within the Russian Federation under the leadership first of Ahmad Kadyrov and then Ramzan Kadyrov, which we know from the press. So basically, Kadyrov can run Chechnya at his own will, but of course, without financial help from Moscow, Chechnya wouldn't be able to survive. And this is valid for all ethnic republics like Ingushetia, Cherkassia, Kalmykia, all they are called. Without the budgets for Moscow, they would be economically not viable. We come to Georgia. Georgia is the country which is by far the most west-oriented since the fall of the Soviet Union. They seek EU membership, they seek to become members of NATO. They would really like to integrate the Western world. But they have a lot of problems as well. Russia supports or supported and supports still today the separatist Republic of Abkhazia and South Ossetia, which are totally beyond control of Georgia. Then there was a war, the war of August 2008, short, brisk war. We see here Russian tanks building up on the northern side of the Caucasus, ready to cross the Rocky Tunnel and to enter Georgia. The next day, these people would be in Georgia. It was a very brisk war, and then it was French President Sarkozy who negotiated ceasefire. But of course, Georgia remains burdened to have this powerful contrahand in the north, and what is happening in the Ukraine, of course, makes them much more worried. I think Georgia has not the shadow of a chance to become member of NATO or of the European Union. Azerbaijan, since the last 30 years, did best, feared best. Haidar Aliyev, that's the father of the current president Ilham Aliyev, was clever enough to transform the oil reserves and then later the gas reserves into assets of the US. So interested a lot of US companies to drill the oil, Chevron and whoever it is, Texaco. And so the interest of the US is that Azerbaijan remains independent. Of course, Azerbaijan has also one liability. They have something like 900,000, that's a lot, 900,000 domestic refugees from the Armenian-Azerbaijani War of 1992-94, where the Armenians consolidated Nagorno-Karabakh as a satellite of Armenia, and at the same time occupied 7 large districts of Azerbaijan and systematically drove all the people away. But they have also a lot of assets, Azerbaijan. They have very strong arms suppliers. One is Turkey, the second one is Israel. And the war there was in 2021 between between Artsakh, how the Armenian called Nagorno-Karabakh, and Azerbaijan. And then Artsakh, of course, with the help of the Armenians, is also called the first drone war of our modern times. So they have excellent suppliers. Then the Ukraine war is also a heavenly sent present for Azerbaijan. Why? Russia is blocked, of course, economically by the embargoes from the US and from Europe. And Azerbaijan now acts as a hub for import of goods into Russia or export of goods out of Russia. So at the moment, Russia is for commercial reasons absolutely dependent of the goodwill of Azerbaijan. And this will help explain that in the last confrontation, where Azerbaijan attacked and took now Karabakh, Russia didn't move. They can't afford to do it. One also has to say Azerbaijan is absolutely in a position to renew the war and take the province of Zangezur or Sionik, which I come in a second. Here we are. Modern Yerevan, you see still church very important. The past, military past is very important. Unfortunately, the modern history is impacted by the war of September, of September-November 2020, when Azerbaijan attacked and they reconquered this part which is in purple. So that is Azerbaijani territory. They retook also here, and they forced Nagorno-Karabakh to cede these territories. The Nagorno-Karabakh, as per Stalin, is the white line. And the Nagorno-Karabakh, called Artsakh by the Armenians, existed from November 10, 2020, till the 20th of September 23. And when the Karabakh Armenians agreed to capitulate, they said they would dissolve themselves by January the 1st, 24. But Azerbaijan wants something more. They still have the problem. Here's Azerbaijan proper, and here's Nakhchivan, and there is no land connection. And Iran is traditionally rather an ally of Armenia. So what Azerbaijan now requests is a corridor that would go from Azerbaijan properly into Nakhchivan, and this would, of course, fulfill also the dream of Enver Pasha of a pan-Turkic unit going from Constantinople till Baku. Personally, I'm convinced if Armenia doesn't come to a compromise with Azerbaijan, we will have another war, and Azerbaijan will take what they need, what they think they should have. Coming to Armenia. Armenia is a country, unfortunately, with few assets, but ridden and loaded with many problems. Politically, one can also say Armenia is a country with no friends. If one look on the border, they have no diplomatic, no commercial relations with Turkey on one end, on Azerbaijan on the other end. What is the situation today? Until 2020, Armenia was dependent on the support of Russia. But as one saw, the support of Russia in 2020, when Azerbaijan attacked, was lukewarm. And what became also apparent that the weapon and the anti-missile defense systems the Russians had given to the Armenians were outdated. The drone could easily destroy them. So it became obvious that the Russian support was not so strong as the Armenian had hoped. And the new president, Roshanyan, who came into power after the last war of 2020, he tried to follow a pro-Western policy. He tried to make smaller the dependence on Russia, but he lost the Russian support and he didn't gain any Western support. And that's the reason that 2 months ago, Azerbaijan was able, within 1 day, to take the rest of Nagorno-Karabakh, which is now gone for the moment to history. If you give me still 2 minutes, what are the options for Armenia at the moment? I said it's a country without friends. Who should help them or guarantee security? Russia is out of the question. They have no interest anymore, and they are dependent on Azerbaijan for their trade. China has no interest. So the Belt and Roads Initiative doesn't pass here. EU has no interest, and anyway, it's not a military force, so it's irrelevant in that case. And then so Armenia is caught between two: Azerbaijan, who wants more, and Turkey. Turkey, of course, through the embargo with Armenia, the east of Anatolia suffers a lot economically. And one may wonder if it wouldn't be the best strategy for Armenia to try a reapproachment with Turkey. There was already a trial in 2010 under the auspices of the foreign minister of the States, Hillary Clinton, and her Russian colleague. There had been an agreement signed in Switzerland, in fact, very close to where I live in central Switzerland, but that the economic relations between Turkey and Armenia should be opened. That was too fast. Should be reopened again, and one would then see next steps. It was then in those times vetoed by the Armenian parliament. So what I want to say, maybe Turkey has also an interest to end the blockade, and seeing the growing power of Azerbaijan to have a counterweight to Azerbaijan. But of course, the Caucasus has two other problems. One is the inexistent or weak economic cooperation between these nations. And finally, what I say is a kind of poisoned mindset of the people. I never traveled in all my life to countries where they hate each other so much. The Azerbaijani hate the Armenians, and the Armenians hate the Azerbaijanis. And any solution or appeasement can only work if this hate narrative you see in the press, you hear in the talks, you see it on televisions, you see it in political declarations, if this hate narrative doesn't stop. Sorry, I overspent a bit my time. For those who couldn't keep all the borders and all the numbers and everything in your mind, the source of my lecture is from my second volume, History of the Caucasus, which was published this year and now hits the market. It's a continuation of volume 1. Volume 1 deals with the North and South Caucasus till the year 1000, and volume 2, 1000 till more or less today. They are offered by for sales here, and I'm most happy to sign them. Thank you for your attention.
Christoph is happy to answer questions. So if there are any, please wave at me and I will bring the microphone over to you.
Thank you very much. Very fascinating talk. Right at the end, talking about Armenia's present situation today. Obviously, the possibility that they may align themselves to Turkey is unlikely. But how does Iran do all of this? I know historically they have some connections with Armenia. You know, what do you think? How do they intervene?
In the first, thank you for the good question. In the first Armenian-Azerbaijan War of 1992 to 94, Iran was crucial for the Armenians. They wouldn't have survived without Iran because they supplied oil and whatever, also electricity, of course, to Armenia, and they were really on Armenian side. However, of course, not out of love for Armenia, because there are huge tensions between Azerbaijan independent, I call now North Azerbaijan, and Azerbaijan in Iran, which is are 5 provinces. And there are more Azerbaijanis in Iran than in Baku, Azerbaijan. So there's a lot of tensions, and this is the motivation for the Iranians to support Armenia. However, at the end of the war in 94, when it looked that Armenia might continue to advance, Iran issued a very clear warning that they should stop, that the support would stop now. In the last war of 2020, Iran is sat still and didn't move. And I think they don't see anymore a benefit to intervene and become the target possibly of Turkey, Azerbaijan's ally. And assuming Azerbaijan can consolidate its informal, of course, contact or alliance with Israel to become the target of Israel. Because one knows that Israeli planes, warplanes, are allowed to land in Azerbaijan. So from there, it would be very easy to move. And Azerbaijan is also an ideal place to monitor electronically, of course, what is happening in Iran. So I think they would keep quiet. But they wouldn't like at all to see Turkey, Nakhchivan, Azerbaijan corridor, but they wouldn't move.
And sort of coming on the back of the previous question is what's sort of the role of the US in the Armenian defense and military? Because it's being large Armenian diaspora in the US. I was just thinking the same reasons of sort of securing the northern border of Iran, whether that's for US play.
Yes, there is a big diaspora in the US. I don't remember. I think it was in 94, 95. Congress passed a bill, I don't remember the name of the bill, that the US was not allowed to support Azerbaijan in technical and military matters, and also with bank loans. And the president has to waive every 6 months or 12 months this bill. So it's put out, it's not working. The diaspora is numerous, but it's not very well organized. And since Armenia relied till 2020 on Russian military hardware, the American would never sell them anything. And then again, what do you do in Armenia? Stone. It sounds all very unfair. It's landlocked. It's poor. Azerbaijan is much more interesting. You know, one thing is what politicians maybe say in talks like this, but they would definitely not lift the finger for the Armenians, unless there are elections and the Armenians manage to organize themselves.
I think, I'm sorry, but I think we are going to have to close it there. We have run quite a long time over, and a number of people have already had to leave. But Christoph, thank you very much indeed for that. It was wonderful to have you back. It was a fascinating talk. Those who would like to know more have the opportunity to buy the book. Those who feel too embarrassed to leave without buying the book are welcome also. And we look forward to seeing you again, both online and in person over the next few weeks. Our next event will be a meeting of our book club, the Reading Room, on the 5th of December, when Sophie Ibbotson will be interviewing the author of the book Unraveling the Silk Roads, the textiles along the Silk Road. And on the 6th of December, we have another event here at the Royal Astronomical Society, when Dr. Sajjan Gohel will be talking about Ayman al-Zawahiri, the founder of Al-Qaeda. And then we take a break for Christmas. Thank you very much indeed.